We know that we can create EBS volumes in the AWS cloud that we can then basically treat as virtual disk devices that we can then attach to EC2 instances. And when we do that, that shows up as a new disk device in the virtual machine operating system. And so you would treat it as a regular disk device. You would initialize the disk, you would partition, you would format it, copy data to it, set permissions to files and folders as you normally would. The only difference is this is a managed service in the cloud. And so we're going to go ahead and attach an EBS volume to an EC2 instance. Why don't we start here in the console by going into the EC2 management console. Let's go to the instances view and let's open up an existing instance and poke around for a moment at its storage. So down below, I'll click the storage tab. Every EC2 instance is created from some kind of machine image that has an operating system. So we've got a root device EBS volume for the OS. We've got a volume ID here. It's about 30 gig in size, and of course it's attached to the EC2 instance we happen to be looking at the properties of. If I click on that volume ID, it takes me into a filtered view for EBS volumes. That's really where it placed me here, in the volumes view under Elastic Block Store. And there's the volume. If I click on it again, I have all of the details. So it's a GP2 100 IOPS 30 gig disk, not encrypted because there's no KMS key information. Of course, over on the right under encryption, it also says not encrypted. Well, that's a good indicator. And down below, the volume status and the IO status are both looking good and enabled. And if I go to monitoring, this is where I might choose to look at some of these metrics for read and write throughput, read and write bandwidth, the average queue length, where queuing up items for a long period of time is bad news. It means your underlying disk IO subsystem is too busy to deal with disk requests, so it's queuing them up. We also have average read and average write size when it comes to data. So this can be extremely valuable. However, if I go back to the volumes view, I've got a volume here called Windows Data Vol 1. And if I just stay in this view and scroll over to the right, under the volume state column, it states that that is an available EBS volume. In other words, it's not attached to an instance. So I'm going to put a check mark next to it. And under the Actions button, I'm going to choose Attach Volume. So it says that this is an encrypted volume. And so you can only attach it to an instance that supports EBS encryption. So from the instance drop-down list, I could choose the instance I wanted this to be attached to. The device name is generated automatically, and I could just choose Attach Volume. Once I've done that, that data volume will now show over on the right as being in use with a link to the instance ID. Let's go ahead and create another volume. I'll leave the defaults here for SSD GP2 100 gig, and I'll just go ahead and create volume. So it shows up at the top of the list here. I'll just get a click right in the name column, and I'm going to call this Windows Data Disk 2, and I'll click Save. Now this one is not encrypted, so if I select it and go to Actions and then choose Attach Volume, I don't get that note about the instance having to support EBS volume encryption. But notice my list of instances is very tiny. Where are they all? I know I have many more. Well, there's a note that tells us exactly what's going on. It says only the instances in the same availability zone, which in this case is US East 1A, as the selected volume will be shown. Oh, okay. Well, let me cancel out of that. If I select that disk volume and go to Actions, Modify Volume, if I go to my instances view, and let's say I'm interested in my Windows Server 2022-1 virtual machine, I'll just click on the instance ID to get some details. If I go down under the networking tab, notice that this is in an availability zone called US East 1B. Well, no wonder it's not showing up as an instance I can attach the volume to. So I'm going to go back to volumes, create another one, but this time I'm going to change the availability zone to US East 1B. I'm going to go ahead and create the volume. So it's vol-0C2 is part of the unique name. So that's shown here in the list. I'm just going to go ahead and edit it in line and call it Windows Data Disk 3. Now this time, when I have it selected and go to the Actions menu, now Attach Volume is grayed out. Let's just refresh the screen. It was just created. Let's try that again. There we are. We can now attach volume. When we go to our instances view, now we have a different list. because the availability zone matches. Not every service is like this in AWS, but some are. So I'm going to select my Windows Server 2022-1, and I'll go down at the bottom and click Attach Volume. So if we go back to our instances view, check out the details of that instance and scroll down under the Storage tab, notice that we now have two volumes shown. The one we've just attached is the 100 gigabyte one. I'm just going to go at the top here and click Connect, RDP client. I'm going to download a remote desktop file to connect to it. I'm going to get the password by decrypting the password with my Windows key pair file, which I have on my machine. I'll click Decrypt Password. There we are. I'll copy the password and I'll click the RDP file. I want to open a remote connection because I want to see what that disk looks like within the OS. The answer is it's going to look like any disk would in the OS. It's not going to be any different than anything you would have encountered before if you're already familiar with disk management in that OS. So, for instance, here in my Windows Server environment, if I search for disk, and if I choose Create and Format Hard Disk Partition, it starts the old disk management utility. There's more than one way to do this, but there's my 100 gigabyte disk. I could right-click on it, and nothing's available because over on the left, it's offline. So over there, I'll right-click and choose Online. Then I can right-click on the disk over there on the left again and choose Initialize Disk. Let's say is GPT, so we can have more than 4 partitions. Okay, there we go. Now I can right-click on it, let's say, and just build a simple volume and just accept all of the defaults. It'll format it as NTFS, it's drive letter D. It's just another mass storage device at this point. But that's important to know when it comes to attaching EBS volumes to EC2 instances.